Hey guys, this is Roxum087 doing a quick Q&A video. A lot of people, you guys on my Facebook page, have been asking me how do I tune my Glocks and stuff. I'm sorry if I can't get to all you guys because I didn't expect so many people to ask me. And I am making that video. I just haven't posted it up yet because there's a lot of things to cover. And it's also a very controversial topic. A lot of people have different opinions of that. Just a lot of people have problems with certain people when they tune their Glocks in certain ways. So that's the reason why I haven't posted that video up. Just because it's a little bit more complicated, a little bit harder for you to understand if you don't visually see all this stuff. Okay? But to answer some of your questions more directly, hopefully this video can answer your questions. And let me know if you guys like this video format, because this is the very first time I'm doing a Q&A video. Okay, let's start with the very first question. So someone asked me that, so the guy who asked me the question, he has a PGC slide and a stock Murray frame. And everything inside is completely stock, and he's been having problems getting it to cycle. Correct me if I don't actually remember if you have a PGC slide or a Guns Modified slide. Both of those slides are not too hard to fit. You know, everyone says that a Guns Modified slide is hard to fit. It's not that hard to fit, be quite honest with you. That's my personal opinion on it. Anyways, so what you've been telling me is that you're worried about you having problems, you're worried about it catching, you're worried about it going slow. Okay, so now, let's assume that you want to, I'm assuming right now that you want to keep all your parts stock. Okay, that's the first assumption that I'm going to make, because the whole entire time I've been talking to you, you seem like you don't want to, I don't know if you want to get parts, I don't know what your budget is like. So first, I'm going to assume that you want to fit your metal slide onto your stock Murray Glock, and I'm going to tell you how to fit that right now. So this is not a stock Glock, and this is not a stock, you know, this is not any of your stuff. But this is the only example I have available. So the very first thing you do is that you should install your metal slide. After you install your metal slide, I want you to do something for me. I want you to cock your slide like this and see if it catches on the rotor. Okay? Basically what happens is that when it catches on the rotor, it should get stuck like this. Okay? Now, what I want you to do is that after you get it stuck, can you push the slide forward slightly? Like this. Afterwards, you should feel resistance, and then it'll go back into barrier very slowly. Now, to get rid of that problem, here's the trick. There are two major things that you can do to get rid of that problem. This is not the best way to do it, but this is a very good way to do it if you want to be cheap, if you don't want to swap out parts, which sometimes for certain people that can be simpler. So the very first thing you do is that you see this silver area over here. I actually grinded away the hammer bump on the hammer. Now, believe it or not, if you guys can actually see, this hammer bump used to be very high. And what this does is that this is actually an inherent problem built into the Glock. In fact, if you know a company called Guns Modified, they're very famous for creating the Zero Hammer. The Zero Hammer is one of the few only aftermarket hammers that actually removed or have a smaller hump on the hammer. And they purposely removed that so that your blowback housing unit doesn't hit it. On the stock Murray hammer and on the AIP, AKA, and UAC, the hump is actually quite high. And sometimes it can actually contact your hammer. And you know what? There's another way that you can visually see this for yourself. Let's say you've been using your Glock for a while. If you've been using your Glock for a while, you might actually see some scratch marks on the top side of this hammer. You'll actually see some scratch marks, and that's because the blowback housing unit has been hitting it. That's actually a very good way for you to see and understand this for yourself. So basically, one of the first things you can do is basically get rid of that. Okay? Just get rid of that. Use a Dremel tool with a mill head if you can, and you just remove that slowly. Or you can use a file, but if you use a file, it'll take you like 100 million years. So, you know, go ahead if you want, but, you know, it'll take a while. Okay, so that's the very first modification. Now, the second modification is sort of extreme. I don't recommend you do this until you try this one first. The second modification is, can you see that there used to be a bump here? Okay, if you pick up your Glock right now in your hand and hold it up like this and check this area, you'll notice that on your Glock, you will have a bump over here. I removed this bump over here because what it does is that as your slide goes on the rotor, when it hits the rotor, it gives it more space to move up and down. And this allows the slide to hop over the rotor. That's the reason why the slide seems to be quite smooth right now. I'm using a stock recoil spring. So as you can see, I'm still hitting the rotor, but it's going over it. So even with a weak recoil spring, you can still go over the rotor. Okay, so that's the second modification that you can do. And besides removing these bumps on this and this side, you may or may not have to remove a little bit at the front, just a little bit. The reason why is because as you set your slide on, you'll notice that the slide sometimes goes into the slide. When you insert it like this, you can see it go at a different funny angle. Sometimes actually removing these bumps makes it easier for it to go. That's the reason why sometimes if you see a very, very old, a very, very worn Glock, you will actually see these bumps reduce itself. That's one of the reasons why. Loosening this tolerance doesn't affect your accuracy. It just means that your slide can move up and down a little bit easier. As long as you do a little bit, it's not too bad. Okay? You're going to have to take this apart in order to file it, because the area here is too narrow to do that. Okay. Now, the second question you asked me is about hammer springs. Why having a harder hammer spring might be bad. Now, this question is very controversial, very difficult for you to believe unless you try it for yourself. Okay? Now, if you guys whoever's watching this video, as you may know, having a harder spring just means that you sometimes get a harder kick out of your gun. And the reason why is because as it strikes your flowing valve on your magazine, what happens is that it just pushes it a little bit harder and gets a little bit more of a jolt out of your gun. However, there's a couple of things that you have to think about. If you have a harder hammer spring, you have to remember that your slide now has to fight this harder hammer spring as it goes back. Okay? It has to fight the harder hammer spring. So that's the reason why, even if you get a harder hammer spring, the cycling rate of your slide might be slow. That's the very first problem that you can get the second you upgrade your hammer spring. Okay? Let me explain this a little bit clearer. So besides cocking the hammer a little bit harder, it's more effort for you to cock the hammer because you have to fight this, right? When the slide goes back, it also has to fight this again. Now, if you don't understand, here's the reason why. Imagine the blow-up housing unit was going back right now onto this rotor. Can you see that the rotor can still go down? Okay? So if there is a super, super hard hammer spring, it is harder for this to go down. So that means that as your slide goes back, this won't sink, and your slide can sometimes jam up. This is the most common way that your Glock can jam itself. It can jam itself like this. It'll just jam itself like this permanently, pretty much. Okay, and the reason why is because that rotor is just super, super stiff and it won't move. That's how you get a jam on your Glock. So people say like, oh man, Glocks are such problematic. It's, because every time I upgrade it, you can create a problem. But you'll notice that when you run it stock, it actually runs pretty good. Okay, that's why this kind of problem, it's mostly created by the person who's upgrading it. It's not really an inherent problem. It has to behave that way because that's the only way that the hammer can cock. So that's the reason why. That's one of the reasons. So that's basically one of the major reasons as to why a harder hammer spring may not make your Glock cycle faster, because if anything, it makes your Glock cycle slower. That's the thing I notice. You will also notice that most IPSC shooters use a competition hammer spring, which is a hammer spring that's just hard enough to start gas coming out of your magazine, but light enough that your slide can cock the hammer. That is what a competition spring is. In order to make one, you have to tune it according to the way that, however way you set up your Glock. If you're tuning an IPSC Glock, it's automatically assumed that you'll fix up everything, like the compression over here, like how easy it is for the sear to lock, how easy it is for the sear to take off the hammer. Okay, those are the stuff that you think of. You asked me that question. It's very, very tricky. If you're looking at your stock Glock right now, just stick to the basics. In my personal opinion, that's my recommendation to you, since you don't want to spend too much money on your Glock. So yeah, those are the first two questions. Now, time for the third question. The third question is that one of you guys who follow my YouTube page, you guys have been asking where's the problem video that shows you how to fix your jamming issue. I'm making that video. It's just that that video is very, very difficult to make. And the reason why is because you see this list right here? That's actually how many problems that I have to go through. So in order to go through all these problems is very, very difficult. Each of these videos are very, very long. I have no way to shorten them because these are all just problems that are very difficult to explain to people sometimes without showing you in person. I will try to make those videos as soon as I can. I'm still in the process of making them, but I'll post it as soon as I can. So actually right now you told me that your Glock is jammed up right now, and that every time you have it like this, when you pull your trigger, you can see your slide move. Your Glock is stuck like this, but you can see your slide move. That's what I saw in the video that you sent me. So, actually, this is actually one of the problems that shows up in one of my lists, and that has to do with the trigger bar hooking. Now, how can I tell that is the trigger bar hooking? It's because when you show me a video of your Glock, basically your Glock was stuck like this, and every time you pull your trigger, like this, I can see your slide move a little bit. And what that is basically, you see this, let me see, well, let me just get the position. Okay, you see this area here on the blow-by housing unit. Now, believe it or not, sometimes when people have triggers that go all the way out, a trigger like this, can you see that the trigger is all the way out and it has take-up? Okay, that take-up, sometimes the trigger bar, if it's bent, you can get hooked on the blow-by housing unit here. Okay, when the trigger bar gets hooked over here, what happens is that it prevents the slide from going forward because this part of the trigger bar, when it's at the back over here, it just stops and prevents pretend my finger is the blow-by housing unit. It will just get hooked like this, and it won't allow it to go forward. Okay, your slide will just stay stuck in that position. So the very first thing that you have to do is that I am going to teach you how to free your slide, okay? So the very first thing that you have to do. Okay, now I put my gun on slide lock just so I can show you. The very first thing you do is that you have to look inside your slide. Okay, this is very, very difficult to show you. I can only do my best. So, but basically what happens is that if you have your slide, using one of your hands, push the slide all the way back. Like hold it back like this. And what you do is that use a screwdriver or something thin, reach into the area where your trigger bar is. Okay? Reach to your trigger bar and push it down. After you push it down, your slide should just snap back. Now to visually show you what happens is that imagine this trigger bar is hooked to your blow-by housing unit. You basically reach in from the chamber and you're doing this. You're basically pushing it down so you can free your slide. Okay? Pulling the trigger bar, the reason why pulling your trigger bar is not freeing your slide is because you notice that this trigger is staying up. If it stays up like that, that just basically means that it will just hook onto your trigger bar forever. Hook onto your blow-by housing unit forever. So that's the reason why you have to weave your screwdriver in, push it down to free your slide. That's the only way you can do it. Okay? Make sure you use something that doesn't damage your Glock. Try to use a pen. A pen may be more gentle, but you have to make sure that pen is thin. Okay? I just use a screwdriver because I know where it is already. Now that I'm teaching, now hopefully your slide is free. If your slide is not free, then I'm assuming it's another problem. But normally, if you pull your trigger and you see your slide stuck and your slide moves a bit, normally that has to do with the trigger bar hooking issue. Normally, if it's not, let me know. But let's say if it is, okay? Let's say if you're actually having that issue. One method that you can do is that in the picture I actually saw in the picture that you had a Guns Modified trigger handy. If you can actually just install your tunable trigger, you can actually fix that problem. And here's the reason why. Can you see that the trigger bar is sitting at a different position? This is a Ready Fighter trigger. This is the Guns Modified trigger, not untuned, okay? look at the difference between where the trigger bar sits. Okay, so basically when you tune your trigger all the way back, your trigger bar will go further and further back. And as it goes further and further back, it can no longer hook onto the blow-by housing unit. That is the best way to solve it in your situation. Because you have a guns modified trigger handy, I recommend you solve it the way that I'm suggesting to you right now. Just basically take your trigger bar out, put your guns modified trigger in, and tune it all the way to the end, and you should solve that problem immediately. If it doesn't solve that problem, I'm going to have to make a separate video for you, because this video will be way too long if I show you guys how to fix it right now. It's sort of complicated to fix. You really have to check that. And the second thing to check is that when you take your trigger bar out, check if nothing is bent. Everything should be at a 90-degree angle to this part of the trigger bar. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of the questions and answers video. I hope it wasn't too long. Sorry for making the video long if it is, but I hope you guys found this video a little bit useful. And for you guys who normally follow me on my channel, if you guys see this, sorry for the long video. Anyways, guys, please feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. Hope this video helps. Peace, guys. Happy shooting.